In this video, I'll answer questions about building a van using 80/20 that I commonly get in the YouTube comment section and also on consult calls when I'm talking with DIY van builders. Questions like, how do you attach the panels to the cabinets? Do you have anything in between the 80/20 and the van walls? How do you make sure everything is square? How do you attach the cabinets to the van? How do you make a toe kick? And how do you connect the bed to the cabinets? And at the end of the video, I'll answer a couple of questions that I commonly get about insulating behind the cabinets. So if you're doing a van conversion yourself, or you're trying to choose a professional builder, this video is definitely for you. So let's get into it. So I've recently done a couple of videos about building vans with extruded aluminum, or 80/20 as it's commonly referred to. I did one on how we do our upper cabinets, and also one just in general on when we use the extruded aluminum versus wood, the pros and cons of each. So if you want to check out those videos, I'll link to those in the description. But since then, I've gotten a lot of questions about building vans out of extruded aluminum. And also I've done a couple of consulting calls with people who are interested in building their vans using extruded aluminum and had a lot of questions. Now, if you're interested in booking a consulting call, you can check out the link in the description and go ahead and book that with us. So you can book a 30-minute call. We'll help you with electrical, 80/20, plumbing, layout, design, whatever it might be. So one of the big questions I get is attaching the extruded aluminum boxes or cabinets to the van. So you're typically going to build those cabinets out of the van, and then you're going to move them in and attach them. The way that we attach them is we screw them into the walls and into the floor. And I'm going to show you exactly how we do that and a couple of important things to keep in mind when you're doing that. Now, there's a few different points where we attach these. We've attached them into the back of bars into this side of the van, and then we also have put screws into the floor, all the way through the floor, the subfloor, and into the metal floor of the van. That way you get a super solid structure that's not going anywhere. You can see that thing is just rock solid. Now, there's a couple of things that are super important when you're attaching these to the van. One is that they're secure and that they're going to stay secure, and the other is that they stay square and parallel to the lines of the van. You don't want your cabinet to be off kilter, and you also don't want the face of your cabinetry to be at an angle. And that's really easy to do because the walls of the van, depending on which type of van, whether it's a Sprinter, a Transit, a ProMaster, may not be exactly 90 degrees to the floor. So for example, if I was to put this square against this wall, it's touching up here at the top, but there's a gap at the bottom because the Sprinter wall is actually angled in. This first section of the wall up to about here is actually angled in very slightly. So if I was to put my cabinetry against that and screw it in down towards the bottom, I would pull the bottom of my cabinet in, which would throw the whole thing out of square. So here's how we do it. The first thing we do is we put a square up on it, make sure that we have it all square. Then we screw up near the top as high as possible. We screw into the side of the van. That's going to secure it back against the van and keep everything square. The next thing we do is we make sure that this is lined up with the square, and if it's not, you actually can pull it or push it in just a little bit. Your back wall is attached, but you can, like if this was the back wall and this was the base, you could push it in or out just slightly to make it all square. So you want to get it all square. Then we drill in these towards the front. So we have bolts and going into riv nuts going across the upper part across the back. And then in the floor, we want them to be as far forward as possible. That way you have anchor points high and out here as far apart as possible, which are going to help stabilize everything. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can attach these. A lot of people will use a corner bracket, and they'll attach that to the back part, the back bar, and then they'll put the bolt through that into the wall. And that's fine, you can do that. But with these are a couple, $2 or $3 each, depending on where you get them. And so that can add up to, a lot of extra money. But more importantly, they're just not as strong. Because one thing about extruded aluminum, it's super strong and stable, But when things are flexing or moving, then there is a chance that they could weaken and loosen. And so just taking this corner bracket out of the equation just makes your attachment to the van a little bit more secure. So here's how we do it. Now we're going to be using a number 14 screw. So here's a couple of lengths. Here's a 2-inch, here's a 3-inch. So depending on where we're putting them into the floor, we could use either one of these. If your floor has thick insulation, like maybe a 1-inch foam board, then you might need a 3-inch screw. If it's a little bit thinner, you might need a 2.5. You can kind of figure out what length you need. But we use a number 14 stainless steel screw with a flat head, which means it's kind of beveled here and flat on the top. Okay, so we do that. Then we drill a pilot hole, just a little bit smaller than the screw. And we'll do that straight through the middle of the channel, through the extruded aluminum, through the floor, and through the sheet metal floor of the van, all the way through everything. Okay, and you want to check before you do that and make sure it's all clear underneath, but typically you're only drilling maybe this far through the floor of the van, and so there's usually not anything you're going to hit, but you just want to check and make sure everything's clear before you start drilling. Next, we take a 1/4-inch drill bit and we drill through the extruded aluminum, only through the extruded aluminum. So we're just boring out that portion of the hole. We're leaving the one in the floor with just the pilot hole. Okay, so we got a 1/4-inch hole now. Then we take this step bit.
Hey guys, do you enjoy the outdoors but planning meals has got you down? Whether it's space, weight, refrigeration, or prep, healthy, quick, and easy delicious meals can be a real challenge. More and more people are turning to ThriveLife freeze-dried meals because they're lightweight, need no refrigeration, have no preservatives, and taste amazing. Just add hot water and you've got a meal in less than 10 minutes. With breakfast, lunch, and dinner options, Thrive has got you covered. Check out the link in description for more info.
And we like this one. They make some that are a little bit more of a shallow angle, but we like this one. And because when you put it in, this tip will fit right into that 1/4-inch hole that you've drilled, and then you can bore out the top part of the extruded aluminum so that this flathead will fit into it. So it works really well, and this bevel just fits into that channel just perfectly. And so we will drill directly through the extruded aluminum and into the floor. That way it's a really secure fastening, and you have very little chance of that vibration or wiggling, loosening anything up like you could have if you use a corner bracket. If we're doing it into the wall, we do the same thing, but then we would just drill into a riv nut. So we'd start out with a smaller drill bit, we'd do a pilot hole into all the way through the extruded aluminum bar into the sheet metal, then we pull it away, we drill out the hole for the riv nut, we'd put the riv nut in, then we'd put the cabinetry back into place. We'd use a 1/4-inch bolt, again with the flat head. It's going to fit right into the channel, and then we're going to bolt that into the riv nut. You just want to keep your level on there and keep checking all the way as you put in each bolt, and make sure that everything's staying square and also in line with the parallel to the van. So we'll have, when we're putting these in, we'll have a center line in the van that we can measure from at each point and make sure that we're staying perfectly straight. Because there are times where the taper of the van could make, if you just screwed the cabinetry directly into the metal, you could end up with your cabinet being a little bit off with the parallel lines of the van. That's especially true in the back, where the back of the van tapers in a little bit. And it's also especially true on our kitchen galley, because this is 36 inches tall and it hits on the C-pillar of the van up in the back, but in the front it's not hitting on anything. So if we pushed it in, it would hit that C-pillar, but then in the front it would go in a little bit more, and we'd have it maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch out of parallel if we just pushed it against the back. So you always want to keep a mark in the center of the van and measure from that and make sure everything stays parallel. Another question that I get a lot is, do you attach the metal directly to the metal of the van? And the answer to that is no. We use a spacer. And the reason for that is you want to create a thermal break, meaning the heat or cold on the van metal, you don't want that to transfer into your cabinets, because it could, first of all, create make the extruded aluminum either hot or cold depending on the weather. But if it's cold, it could also create condensation on the metal. And so you just want to have a little bit of a break. So what we do is we make up these spacers on a 3D printer. This is one that's a 1/2 inch thick. Here's one that's an 1/8 inch thick. So we'll make several different sizes. These are just 1 inch by 1 inch with a 1/4 inch hole in the middle. And we'll do them from anywhere from an 1/8 up to a 1/2 inch. We find that that will work in pretty much any situation. So we'll do an 1/8, a 1/4, maybe 3/16, 1/2 inch. And so we have several of these. And so what we do is get the cabinet all square and parallel, and then we'll just take these little inserts and we'll figure out what size we need to fill that gap between the cabinet and the metal of the wall. So we'll at least use a 1/4 inch spacer. We'll always space it up by a 1/4, but if we need more than that in order to keep it straight, we'll just go with a bigger one. Now, if you don't have a 3D printer or the ability to get spacers like this, you can just use shims. So here's a composite shim that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's. They use these a lot for setting doors and windows, but you can just take these, take a couple of them and just slide them in the back and put your bolt right through that in order to create that gap. And if you don't want to use those, you can even just use plywood, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, whatever you need in order to create that little gap or thermal break between the cabinet and the wall. So the next question I get a lot is, how do you attach your panels to the extruded aluminum? And there's a few different ways depending on the situation that we do that. But here's a piece of bamboo. So if we were going to attach that to a cabinet, how would we attach it? Well, probably the most secure and easiest way would just be to drill straight through it and into the cabinet. But in that case, you're going to see the screw. For some people, that's an issue. For others, it's not. You can use, nice stainless steel screws or black or whatever that look really clean. As long as you space them very evenly and it looks like it was intentional, then really that's not a bad look. But if you don't want to see the screws, there's a couple of other ways that you can do it. So when we're using those screws and going straight through, we'll usually use a screw like this. This one I think is 1.5 inches. We also get them 1.25 inches. I think it's a number 8. It's called a truss head screw. It has a nice looking head on it that doesn't look bad when you see it in the material. If I was attaching our hex ply, then that black screw head looks really good, really clean. If I was doing it on the bamboo, I may use a stainless steel screw, or I might even use a gold screw. There's different colors available, so you can get something that kind of coordinates with your material. So what you're going to want to do in this situation is just drill out a hole. We usually will use a micrometer, and let's just say this was 4 millimeters. I just like to go about 1 millimeter smaller. So I'll find a drill bit that's about 3 millimeters, and I will drill the hole out into the extruded aluminum. So we'll measure and make sure that we're going straight into the middle of the channel, which for 10 series would be 1/2 inch down. So we'll measure 1/2 inch down, and we'll drill a pilot hole that's about 1 millimeter smaller than the screw. So in this case, if this was 4 millimeter, I use a 3 millimeter drill bit. I drill through the board, I drill through the metal, and then I just put the screw into it. And this is a self-tapping screw, so it's actually going to help bore out its own hole as it goes into the metal and set really well, really strong, hold everything really nicely. So we'll typically use that method for all of our, what do we call our mechanical boxes in the rear of the van. On the hex board, these screws look really good, barely even noticeable, but there are going to be times that you don't want to see any screws. So in those situations, there's a couple of different methods that we use. So we've got some corner brackets attached here. And so what we'll do is we'll just put this piece up and we'll screw them from the back into the board, whatever the panel is. One of the drawbacks of this is if you're screwing into a thin material like 1/4 inch or even 1/2 inch, your screw is not going to have very much material to bite into. So in those situations, this isn't the greatest option, but there is a little trick that we use, and that is that we use VHB tape. This is made by 3M. VHB stands for very high bonding, and I will link to this in the description. and we use the 1/2 inch wide, I believe it is, and we'll just attach this to the actual extruded aluminum, not the brackets, but the extruded aluminum where this panel is going to attach. Okay, so we'll run this all the way around. We'll peel, it's double-sided, super strong. So we'll put it on, we'll peel off the backing, then we'll place this piece, then we'll do the screws from the back. And what that does is that VHB tape probably would hold this in place all by itself. The screws are just going to be a little extra insurance. Now I have had the question, well, won't you see a little gap created by the VHB tape? Well, the VHB tape is very thin. I don't know, maybe a 32nd of an inch thick. And once you put the screws in, it's going to squeeze it tight even more. And so really you're not going to notice a gap. If you're using 3/4 inch material, then it's probably not necessary to use the VHB tape because you can use a longer screw. But for the thinner materials, the VHB tape is a really nice trick. Now the next method that we'll use, and this I think creates a really nice clean look, is using 3/4 inch material. So this is a piece of 3/4 inch white oak, is we'll have it inset into the opening. So this would, fill the whole thing. Because the bar is 1 inch, it's going to create about a 1/4 inch setback. And what we do is we'll have the flat plate, 1 inch wide by 2 inch long flat plate with 2 holes in it. And we would have these maybe, coming off of here, hanging straight down all the way around. And then we'd put the piece back against that, and then we'd screw in from the back through that plate and into the panel, which would hold it perfectly in place. So that's a really nice clean look if you want to have the panel inset. Another thing you can do is you can just slide a 1/4 inch piece into the slot. You can see here on our upper cabinets, we've got panels slid into the slots of the actual extruded aluminum. And so that's something, another method that you can do is just slide 1/4 inch panels into the grooves of the slots. One thing about that I will say is they can tend to rattle. So you're going to want to put a little piece of either foam tape, or sometimes we'll just use a little bit of adhesive in the grooves when we slide it in. Just kind of lock it into place so that it doesn't vibrate or rattle. Another question I get, especially about our kitchen galleys, is do you do a toe kick? And we do. You can see here there is a toe kick. So the way we do that is really simple, and that is just this bar right here. Instead of having it on the ground, we just raise it up. And we do it 3 inches up and 3 inches back. Typically a toe kick in a house, I believe, is about 4 inches up and 4 inches back. Because a van's smaller, we just do it a little bit less. We go 3 inches by 3 inches. But it's really easy just to set this bar up a little bit higher off the floor. And really that's all we do as far as the extruded aluminum construction goes. We just raise this bar off the floor. Then the way that we create the toe kick is just out of wood. So you can see here inside, this will be where our sink is. This is the cabinet under the sink that opens. We have a bottom here, and we call this our false bottom. And this bottom hasn't been secured yet, so right now it'll just lift out. That gives you access. If you have anything underneath here, you can get access. You could even hide a laptop or something underneath there. But then we just created a little box out of wood that just sits just 3 inches back. Just make a little box, set it back, and then using corner brackets or pocket holes, you can screw it into the floor. So that toe kick, that little box is rock solid. And then our false bottom for our sink sits inside of there, and then we just do a little cleat in the back that this sits on. Makes it really easy to be able to just pop this in and out like that. So next, let's talk about the bed. So we actually create the bed using the mechanical boxes in the back. We build these to the height we want, which typically we do 31 inches. Then we add a 15 series extruded aluminum bar on top, so adding another 1/2 inch. So they're going to be 32.5 inches tall. Then when we add our 1/2 inch piece of plywood bed platform, it's going to be the perfect height to match up with the capsules, the bottom of the capsules that we have on the sides of this van. So this just sits on top of the platform, and then we're going to attach this rail to the mechanical boxes. We're gonna have 4 of these. 4 of these, and then our bed platform will sit on top of that. So what you have to use for this is a special corner bracket. And this is not your normal corner bracket. This corner bracket is a 10 series to 15 series, because the mechanical boxes are made out of 10 series. This bar is 15 series. So using a regular corner bracket won't work. So we would just put this, attach it with a T-nut into the 10 series using the smaller hole, and then into the 15 series using the larger hole. And we would put those all the way down and attach those. The only company I found that makes these is the actual company 8020. We don't buy most of our extruded aluminum and hardware from 8020. We use another company that I'll link to in the description that's a lot less money, but they don't make these, and so we do get these from 8020. So I'll link to these as well on the 8020 website. So one thing I love that this bed structure does is it ties everything together. It takes your galley, is connected to your plumbing mechanical box, or the mechanical box on the driver's side, and then you've got these rails that are connected to the passenger side mechanical box, and everything's tied together. So it just makes everything super strong, super sturdy, and also in the event of an accident, kind of ties everything together. So I promise that if you stayed until the end, I'd talk about insulating behind this cabinetry, and we do insulate. And I've talked a lot about leaving the backs of these boxes open, or these cabinets open, so the van can breathe, but it's still important to have insulation in all of those places. So we do insulate, and we'll typically use either 3M Thinsulate or Havelock wool, but you can use whatever insulation you like and just put it behind the cabinets. And then once we do that, we'll put Reflectix up over it. And then we'll just bolt everything to the van. Now you get a question, what about a vapor barrier? If you dive into the rabbit hole of van insulation, you can go pretty deep, and there's a lot of different theories on this, but my philosophy is that a vapor barrier is not necessary in a van, and in fact can actually be detrimental. And the reason is, a cargo van is not built like a house. It's not built to be airtight. It's actually made to be able to have moisture in it and breathe, and allow that moisture to escape outside of the van, to let air in and out of the van. And so if you create a moisture barrier, you could be locking in that moisture in places that you don't want it. So if you use the proper type of insulation, especially like what we use, either 3M Thinsulate or Havelock wool, that material will actually absorb moisture. And you create moisture just by breathing. If you have your van closed up and you're sleeping at night and you're breathing, you're creating moisture. And that moisture's got to go somewhere. And so your insulation material, if it's the right type of material, will actually take that moisture, retain it, and then when you're in a drier climate, or later in the day when things dry out a little bit, then it actually will release that. So it's going to be able to retain that moisture and then release that moisture without molding. So that's super important. If you have a vapor barrier, then you are not going to be able to take advantage of that, and you could have the condensation staying inside the vans or inside your walls and eventually causing rust. Now you might be curious about the pros and cons of using extruded aluminum construction versus wood construction, and we've done a whole video on that. So you can click or tap the screen to watch that video. We've also got tons of other videos on the channel about van life, product reviews, DIY van building tips. So consider subscribing, and be sure to smash that like button. And we'll see you in the next video. Jeff with Thrive Vans. Thrive on. See ya.